Distinguished guests, respected colleagues, and beloved friends, let me begin by expressing my gratitude to the host, Asia Society Switzerland, and the University of Zurich for having me. You know, I must admit that it feels quite surreal to be here in this room with all of you tonight, speaking about the state of Asia, knowing that in this very room 80 years ago in 1946, Sir Winston Churchill delivered one of his famous speech asking for something not less than United States of Europe. Let Europe rise, he said. And 80 years on, two continents apart, and I'm no Churchill, obviously, but I couldn't help myself to think that we might be in the same crossroad, same inflection point, interregnum, the period of transition when an era had ended, but the new chapter hasn't been written yet. Back then, the world order that Churchill knew had ended. The empire was crumbling, Europe was in ruin, and two emerging superpowers, the United States of America and Soviet Union, were trying to define a bipolar world. Today, the post-Cold War era, the globalization, the liberal democracy is fraying before our eyes. Europe rebuilt out of rubble. Asia is trying to build order out of rivalry. Europe integrated out of exhaustion. Asia is trying to integrate during an expansion. Europe rebuilt with American capital, the Marshall Plan. Asia is building amid American tariffs. Well, not just Asia, Switzerland as well. So because of these two landmark moments, it offers parallels. It offers similarities and differences that force leaders within Asia and outside Asia to think ahead, to ponder, to anticipate what the Asia's next chapter on power, on progress, on peace would look like. You know, the same feeling as 1946 and 2026, trying to navigate the post-hegemonic world. And that's essentially the core to my talk tonight that I would like to share with you for the next 15 to 20 minutes. What's Asia's next step after this kind of interregnum, the kind of period of transition where an era might have ended, but the next chapter hasn't been written yet? On power, on progress, and on peace. Maybe 5 to 7 minutes each that I would like to share my hypothesis with you. Obviously, we have more time to have question and answer, and also to get your ideas on what's going on in terms of the future of Asia and the next step of Asia. On power, the next chapter of Asia will be about connection over confrontation. Just a few weeks back, President Trump met with President Xi Jinping for the first time in 6 years. And the Busan meeting lowered the temperature, no new tariffs, sanctions postponed, fentanyl, soybean, TikTok, and port, gave us, the whole world, some breathing space from supply chain jitters and export slowdown. But one can tell and one can argue that it's only a tactical de-escalation rather than a strategic progress. An episodic negotiation rather than a long-term deterrence. So with this fragile stability, leaders around Asia still have to navigate the Pax Americana, the post-hegemonic world where the source of power would come from, given the great power rivalry that Asian leaders are going through right now. But this is not the first time that Asian leaders have to do something like this. Back in 1955, just 9 years after Churchill's infamous speech on United States of Europe, 29 independent nation leaders met up in Bandung, Indonesia, to collectively come to strategic adulthood after their independence, to collectively form a non-aligned movement as a source of power. Neutrality, choosing principles over sides, gave strategic autonomy to Asian countries back then. But the next chapter of Asia will not return to the non-aligned movement, but go beyond that to what I call the network architecture of trust. You know, in this kind of hegemonic vacuum, it's the moment for middle power to become the connective tissue to the international system, to become the geopolitical fabric that woven the polarization together. I think we'll see a rise in minilateralism, small, flexible, action-oriented coalition to attack or to solve specific issues. You know, it's not going to be the classical multilateralism as we know it. It's not going to be a centralized, top-down, supranational governance as we knew it, but it will be a decentralized web of power of nodes, of mini-lateralism, trying to cooperate with one another for stability. The middle power has that kind of chance to turn great power fatigue into regional initiatives that are relevant and matter to the people. And that's a source of power that is coming from Asia. Connection over confrontation, minilaterals that matter to the people, rather than a big multilateralism that it was something that we know from the past. On progress, Asia's next chapter will be about the transformation from being the world's factory to the world's laboratory. You know, the story of Asia for the past decades was about scale, labor, and export. And that's why Asia comprises of more than 40% of total global production and lifted millions out of poverty. However, that model is reaching its limits. Automation replacing labors, geopolitics fragmenting trade, and carbon-blind production is not going to cut it in this century. Another reality is that there's a two-speed Asia happening at the moment. One Asia that is at the low gear, trying to manage maturity, both the economy and demographics, and that is the Northeast Asia. There's another Asia that is in a high gear, maintaining momentum, both the geographics and the economy, and that's the South and the Southeast Asia. South Asia for scale, and Southeast Asia for connectivity. And I feel like that's going to be the next progress. In fact, 30% of the global growth next year will be from South and Southeast Asia. That's the new center of gravity. So, you know, when we talk about the Great Convergence, usually we talk about the East and the West, how this side was trying to catch up with this side. It's no longer horizontal. It's going to be vertical. The South and Southeast Asia, from Chennai to Ho Chi Minh City, is catching up with Shanghai and Tokyo. The question before us is then, how can Asian leaders think about this convergence that has happened, whether you like it or not, into coherence? The technology, the expertise, the capital from North Asia, with the youth and the vibrancy and the scale and the demographics dividend that South and Southeast Asia is offering. On average, if it's China, Japan, Korea, 50 million age in terms of the working age. In South and Southeast Asia is 32. So 2 decades apart in terms of that demographic dividend between the North Asia and the South and Southeast Asia. The question is, how do we synergize that before that demographic dividends run out? And how do we streamline, synergize, prepare education, transportation, knowledge transfer, so that the next chapter of Asia will not be about manufacturing or a factory for the world, but a laboratory for the world. Not just to manufacture for the world, but modernize it. That's the question before us in terms of the next chapter for Asia in terms of progress. And lastly, peace. Asia's next chapter on peace will be about designing for peace rather than hoping for peace. Stable Asia is the ultimate goal. I mean, you all know Asia is not at war, nor is it at peace. You know, various insecurity flashpoints that are well known, the Taiwan Straits, the Korean Peninsula, South China Sea, Himalaya line of actual control, border disputes, Myanmar, just to name a few. And you know, Asia is a kind of continent that planes, chips, and politics collide daily. So just one misjudged moves can travel faster than any reason. So the leaders have to come together and think about the next chapter on a few things when it comes to stable Asia or peace. First is about guardrails to prevent accidents from becoming incidents. Second is rules. And third is room, institutional space that allows people to, host tension as well as contain tensions as well. First, guardrails. How do we stop accidents from becoming incidents? The kind of 24-hour communication, real-time communication, coast guards that can coordinate, hotlines that answer, the ability to communicate with one another, and militaries that design this de-escalation as a strategic process to maintain peace. This is the kind of strategic guardrails that Asia needs if it wants to design for peace. In terms of rules, the so-called gray zone military tactics can no longer remain gray. Cyber attack, drones, maritime militia, space, electronic magnetics, open sea, all these things we need rules for it. The gray zone can no longer remain gray. We have code of conduct, revised code of conduct, so that we can prevent conflicts from exploding in front of our face. And this is what I mean by having rules for something that is 21st century, something that we never talked about before, and it's really important in Asia. And third is room, institutional space that allows rivals to step back without losing face. Those are the things that I argue that Asia needs at the moment. We have ASEAN Regional Forum, we have East Asia Summit, but they're more like conference halls rather than safety walls. They can host tension, but they cannot contain tensions that are coming out of it. And we need to be able to come together and finally have that kind of institutional space, those kind of rooms where rivalries can talk to one another, they can de-escalate, they can step back without losing face. And that's something that Asia is missing at the moment. So Asia's next chapter in terms of power would be about connection over concentration. Asia's next chapter in terms of progress will be the world's laboratory rather than world's factory. The Asia's next chapter on peace is about designing for peace and not hoping for peace. And hopefully, if that's the case, finally we can find purpose in power and balance in progress and permanence in peace. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Pita, for this really, really inspiring.
No, I have to you. It's the room, it's the environment.
I have to say that this whole message of building bridges really resonates with me. It's also something that's dear to my heart.
But do you agree that we are reaching a post-hegemonic world, same feeling at 1946 and 2026?
I definitely agree with you that we need a lot of bridges. And we need a lot of bridge builders. So I have the honor now to kickstart our conversation, and I have so many questions. I'm sure you in the audience have a lot of questions too. We'll start the conversation, but you can already start thinking about possible questions that you might have, because then we'll have time to open up the floor.
Absolutely.
Well, thanks so much.
No worries.
So the first point I wanted to push you on a little bit is geopolitics in the region. And you spoke so beautifully about the middle powers now becoming the connective tissue. And I like this line of thinking. But I wanted to think a little bit more narrowly. So you have in the region now, you have the United States and China in particular trying to gain influence in the region, trying to pull, I would say, some of the countries on their side, and you could see this. You could see this as an opportunity for the region, but you could also see it as a risk for the region. So I'd be curious if you see more opportunities, or if you see more risks, and also how the region could perhaps play its cards particularly well to benefit from this great power rivalry.
Given the post-globalization world that we have and the interdependence of trade and investment, it's just impossible to choose sides, and to be caught up in a chess game between great power rivalry. So back when I referred to Bandung conference in Indonesia, or even ASEAN centrality, usually we talk about neutrality. And neutrality, a lot of ASEAN leaders and Asian leaders mistake neutrality as a position, but it's capability. Neutrality is a capability because you have domestic economy, you have diversified enough so that you have that kind of capability to be able to withstand or to have that kind of resilience when you are being asked to choose sides or pick sides. And I feel like we've gone through a lot of initiatives and alliance that finally we are no longer in that kind of trap where we have to choose one of the sides, but not for all countries. You see countries like India being both in Quad and being in IU2U. You see Indonesia being both in OECD and in RCEP, but those are the big ones. But I feel there's a lot of increase in minilaterals on various things. There are new challenges coming up. And does not have to be in the same camp of this camp or that camp any longer. It's like maybe 4 or 5 countries getting together as a small, flexible, action-oriented web or nodes that are trying to stabilize the international system, the international world standards. And I feel like that's the way forward, going forward, that once you have diversified enough, once you have alliance enough, finally you don't have to worry so much about this in terms of trade concentration or export reliance and things like that.
So it seems, if I understand you correctly, that you see more the opportunities than the risks. You don't see. I mean, of course, nobody wants to have to choose, I suppose, between these two poles now. And if I heard you correctly, you also say that the region doesn't want to and also doesn't need to choose. But it seems like you see the opportunities more than the risks.
I think that would be an overstatement. I think it depends on countries. Some countries that have that kind of capability because they have invested in their domestic economy, they have diversified enough, they have linkages with various coalitions, will be fine. But countries that are too export-oriented, trade-oriented, no domestic economy, and have been over-relied on certain investments, debt diplomacy, the kind of thing, will see that as a risk, and it will be very hard for them to have their own strategic autonomy or their own self-determination of how you do it. But I think, the term middle power has been around before I was born. I mean, if you teach international relations either here at the University of Zurich or you're watching from home, you feel like it's a term that you use all the time, but it's very hard to realize. But I feel like because of the end of a post-Cold War era that we know it, based on American supremacy, starting to come together, and I started to see interesting multilateralism on specific issues that are coming up.
So maybe if middle powers are so hard to grasp, I need to push you a little bit more.
Yes, we have to capitalize on the great power of fatigue now.
Yeah, exactly. I need to push
and turn that into a regional initiatives that really matter.
I guess that's what I wanted to get at a little bit, because you said so beautifully that the middle powers could become the connective tissue, and we definitely need connective
geopolitical fabric that opens.
Exactly. So kind of bring the world together. Maybe you could elaborate a little bit how you think that could happen.
So for Asia, the reason why I referred back to 1955. Do you have a pen that works? I want to draw. So back in 1955, I mean, throughout the last decade, the world was about bipolarity, the United States versus Japan, United States versus Soviet Union, and now China. And back in the days, you have these kind of things as polarization, and then you have Asian countries and global South as a non-aligned movement like this, not choosing sides where we're right in the middle. But now I feel like because of the rise of multilateralism, I feel like it will be a decentralized web of nodes operating for stability all around the world that's trying to move in the polarization together. So instead of looking like this in 1955, it will the world would start to look like this. Instead of like India, instead of South Africa, instead of the middle power back in 1955, say we're non-aligned to either America or Soviet Union, but it's going to be a network architecture of coalition that finally doesn't allow polarization to keep going forward. That's what I have in my head.
Very, very interesting, and I like it's very university style with the slides. I very much like that, and I also agree that we're moving. So I would call it patchwork multilateralism, maybe not mini-lateralism, but it's also, just as a side note,
it's still a hypothesis in progress, but also for these kind of instead of being centralized, this is decentralized. Instead of top-down, supranational governance, maybe it's something that is decentralized, bottom-up kind of thing is the way going forward. That could be the next chapter for Asia or for the world.
But I mean, I would very much agree with you that this is where we are heading. But isn't that also then important for the rest of the world, say Switzerland, also to appreciate, because it's very different to navigate a world like this than to navigate a world like that. So I think it's also important for the rest of the world to appreciate that we're moving in that direction. Huh? So that was geopolitics. I wanted to push a little bit on geopolitics, but I also don't just want to talk about tensions and things that are difficult. So let me talk about challenges, but from a positive side, the solution to challenges. So of course we have a lot of challenges in the world. You can think of climate change. You can think of managing the digital revolution. You can think of poverty, inequality, and so on. And it seems to me that many of the solutions come from Asia, and certainly whether we are able to tackle these challenges effectively is increasingly also decided in Asia. So I just wanted to get your sense of this broad point, whether you agree, and if perhaps you have some examples of how Asia can really also provide solutions for the world when it comes to these challenges.
There was a saying in America, they say that Europe provides the rules and Asia scales the tools. A lot of problems that are going on in Asia, whether it's climate change, green financing, AI safety, those are the things that, because Asia is where demographics, demand, and digitization collide in a region. So that's why, a lot of solutions that Asia is trying to scale, arguably, a lot of those things come from the great power, whether America, China, or Europe. So a lot of carbon transmission, the renewable energy that Southeast Asia and Asia is leading, arguably come from China, India, and Europe. Doesn't mean that Southeast Asia is coming up with these solutions themselves. It's just that because we have that scale, we have that demographics, we have that digitization that allows solutions to be implemented. So my argument when I was speaking is that we can't just be a consumption region. We have to be a production region, and how do you move up the value chain from the world's factory into a world's laboratory when it comes to these things. So coming here to Switzerland, for example, something that if I were the Prime Minister coming to meet your country, I was thinking of the linkages when it comes to life science, pharmaceutical. Those are those things that Switzerland is good at, and something that Asia is lacking. Sometimes in terms of clinical trials, in terms of active ingredient reserves, that's something that we can diversify out. Looking back towards America or China, how they pick up in the industry of life science so quickly, and ASEAN, instead of having solutions that are created in China, India, America, or Europe. So finally, the developing Asia can finally come up with a solution of their own.
Very, very, very interesting. One thing that you also mentioned during your speech that I found really interesting is that there was this great convergence between
the North and the South.
North and the South, exactly. Well, I guess between the East and the West initially.
That's when we were going to school.
Exactly, but now what you're seeing is the convergence between the North and the South and the Southeast. So maybe you could talk. I mean, I just found this really interesting, because also along or building on this theme of global challenges, of course, one of the challenges the world is still facing is that we have a lot of poverty, we have a lot of inequality, and I think the spectacular growth of East Asia, Southeast Asia, China was also responsible for reducing poverty dramatically, as you mentioned. I just wanted to get a sense of whether you think something similarly dramatic is also happening between the North and the South.
So North Asia, China, Japan, Korea, Taiwan, in this area, they're growing maybe, because of China, 4%, but the rest is growing by about only 1%. Yeah, but South and Southeast Asia, because of India, Pakistan, Indonesia, and Vietnam, on an average, is like 5% plus. Philippines 5%, Vietnam 6%. And the average age of South and Southeast Asia, like I said, is 32. And up there in North and Northeast Asia is 50. So 20 years apart. Looking at the current GDP, maybe in 2040, if it keeps going like this, by 2040, they will equalize. The convergence will happen whether you like it or not. So my proposition was that if that's the case, where the growth corridor, when it used to be Tokyo and Shanghai, and now it's Chennai to Ho Chi Minh City, how do you manage that kind of growth going forward in terms of growth, in terms of GDP growth? World is, because he's a chief economist at the WTO, so I have to talk quantitatively a little bit. But they say maybe the global growth is about 3% or something like that. But the major part of that growth is coming all the way from developing Asia. Whether it will reduce or elevate poverty or not, that's a different issue, though.
Right.
In terms of trade, in terms of investment, maybe the top 1% or the top 10% benefits from it doesn't mean that there'll be inclusive growth. But developing Asia is definitely growing. If you just focus on South and Southeast Asia, next year's growth will be accounted for is about 30%. If you still consider China as developing Asia, 52%. So it's the first time in many, many years in history now that global progress or global growth will come from developing Asia. Developing Asia meaning excluding Singapore, Japan, Korea, and all those. So 52% will come from Asia. And within that Asia, it's coming from South and Southeast Asia. I looked at the number. Foreign direct investment incoming to ASEAN, not Asia, Southeast Asia only, is higher than FDI going into China for the first time last year. Again, global FDI going into ASEAN is larger than China for the first time last year. And if you combine India into it, man, it just shows that the great convergence is definitely coming up between the North. Two-speed Asia.
Well, now that you bring up the numbers and trade and the economy, I can't help asking a question about that too. I will come back to it.
I invited you to your turf.
Exactly, you asked for it. We'll come back to...
but I think in this room I can ask back. So I mean, he's a chief economist of the WTO. I cannot fight you.
But I mean, you also said in your presentation that, how did you put it, that Europe was built with American capital and Asia now has to be built
American tariffs
amidst American tariffs. So I just wanted to get your sense of that a little bit. I mean, of course, I think a lot of countries, a lot of ASEAN countries thought they had great relations with the United States, also economic relations with the United States until Liberation Day came. It was a big shock, I think, to the region. Now there's some deals which are called reciprocal, but are really not so reciprocal, I would say. And I think, I mean, my sense is that this is really putting at risk also this trade-led growth model of the region. So I just wanted to get your inside perspective on how bad this whole situation really is, and whether there's something the region can do to kind of help fix things. Because it is just my sense that open and rules-based trade, particularly for a region like that, is very important.
I mean, a short answer in the sentence with that would be that the Liberation Day effect or impact in terms of unpredictability, in terms of volatility, rather than magnitude. And with the benefit of hindsight, if you look at the trade data, there's only modest adjustment because as we were talking, that American trade accounts for less than 20% of the total trade, so that it doesn't really impact that much. But the unpredictability and the volatility makes you anticipate whether that's going to come or that's not going to come. So you start hoarding and you start to inventorize before it comes, and it never came, but you inventorize already. So it's those kind of risk premium that is impacting the global trade rather than the magnitude. Now, if I can explain a little bit more, touring Asia before coming here to Europe, again, it's a case-by-case basis. I mean, if you talk to Indonesian foreign minister, our trade minister, and he says, the domestic economy in Indonesia is so large, our median age is 29, 30. So there's a lot of domestic consumption, and we diversify our trade portfolio pretty well. Vietnam also have free trade agreement with AFTA and EU, so they could diversify into 4 different portfolios of trade, and if that impacts you, that's not an issue. In terms of Thailand, 60% of our GDP is export. And obviously, America, China, within ASEAN, and then Europe maybe, if I rank them. And then you started to see that, yeah, it will impact some of the industries where the consolidation of trade is overly relying on just American market. Some of the industries or some of the products, if they're diversified to Europe, to China, to Japan, to Australia, to America, it will impact only 10% of that because that's the market share. But some industries for Thailand is agriculture, rice, rubber, shrimp, coconut juice. I looked it up, so. These are the industries that supplies or exports to America is number 1, and the market share is so large that even China and India doesn't penetrate the consolidation or the condense of the market. So it's a case-by-case basis, and you have to respond with precision in terms of responding to these kind of tariffs. It's not going to be the overall thing that impacts the overall trade to a particular nation, because in some nation, domestic economy is very strong, diversify the export portfolio pretty well, so no impact. But yes, again, the unpredictability of when to order the imports in and when to wait and those things, it can cause supply chain jitters for sure.
I'm noticing it was a risky excursion because now I have so many questions on trade, but I'm going to constrain myself and get back to the broader issues that we are discussing here. And one thing I noticed is you talked about peace, prosperity, and power.
Power, progress, peace.
Power, progress, not prosperity. Power, progress, and peace.
It's the same thing. So.
Even P also.
Yeah.
But one thing you didn't talk that much about, but I think it's also a topic that's dear to your heart, is democracy and the state of democracy in the region, and how it's evolving over time, and whether perhaps the Chinese model of governance, which clearly has some economic success, or had some economic success in the past, whether that perhaps is looked at more favorably over time. So if you could tell us a little bit about the state of democracy, perhaps also in your country, I think that would be very interesting.
So backsliding for sure. I'm a product of democratic backsliding. That's why I'm not in the government house, but better yet in this room with all of you. But the key theme for the state of democracy, at least in ASEAN, would be dynasty politics and proxy leadership. I mean, if you study the 10 countries in ASEAN, you see that there are sons or daughters of their own father that used to be the president or the prime minister, coming from Philippines, Indonesia, Thailand. Oh, not anymore. Thailand, not anymore. Laos. A lot of countries are coming from think of democracy as a family asset, as a family business rather than democracy in terms of governance. Not an issue. I mean, in America, you have the Bush. In Japan, you have the Abes. In Canada, you have the Trudeaus, for example. But it's starting to pop up, populated in ASEAN for some reason. But it's the proxy leadership that is the problem. It doesn't mean that if you are with the last name of Marcos or the same last name as President Jokowi Gibran, the vice president of Indonesia, as long as you are ready, willing, and able to govern by yourself without having to consulting with your father or the Huns of Cambodia. When the challenge is so abrupt nowadays, right? I mean, it's right in your face all the time in terms of the pace, in terms of volatility of the markets, whether it's the security issue that is coming up. Leaders need to be able to think on their feet without having to, hesitating or worrying what the fathers would decide or would do in these kind of situations. So that's a kind of problem that is going on. You were having, part of your question was about some Chinese model.
I think what you said was already extremely interesting. I'm just perhaps naively thinking that given the success of China, let me go a step back. Even in the West now,
right.
There's an increasing push for, say, industrial policy, and I think it's coming from a sense that somehow China has done this and it has worked. So I'm wondering if maybe the Chinese model of governance more broadly, now not beyond, not in terms of industrial policy, but more democracy, whether that's maybe getting more followers in the region.
I think a lot of influence in Asia would be, from China, would be on the industries and on the trade. There's a lot of manufacturing, there's a lot of retail, tourism, and all these things. So it depends on the country, on how you engage China. If you allow yourself to incur a lot of debt with a sole debt, the kind of investment that you want to monopolize on something, allowing retail, whether it's e-commerce and things like that, in terms of industrial policy to become a backyard of a country. I think those are the things that impact Asian countries that allow something like that. And it's pretty obvious in the case of President Trump in terms of tariff, like Vietnam and Thailand, for example. The term, the backyard to the Chinese production was pretty clear in coming from Washington. So those are the things that you have to be careful.
Yeah, no, I can see that. Maybe before we open up the floor, maybe one last question. Since we are in Europe, I'm sure people are also interested in hearing how the region and perhaps also you think Europe fits into this new world order that you drew here on your map. Is it just like a satellite far gone, where maybe people come for a nice vacation because it's a beautiful place, or do you see a larger role for Europe, perhaps?
Not at all. I think we have to double down on the next chapter of Asia, that is connection over confrontation, and the connection between Asia and Europe has been underestimated a lot. The president just now, I was sitting next to the president of University of Zurich, and he said maybe it's time that there's a connection between Asian universities and European universities to finally come together and sit about where we can synergize together. But if you were to ask me, carbon pricing, carbon accounting, green financing, these are the things, pharmaceutical, these are the things that Europe are pretty good at. It's something that Thailand is, or Asia is lacking. And I want to be able to diversify from just relying on American technology or the Chinese technology when it comes to new issues, AI safety, AI ethics and things like that. I want to be able to coordinate with Europe more on these things.
I see. So I mean, some people say
Not just tourism.
Some people say the U.S. innovates, China imitates, and Europe regulates. But then I think you see the good part of it.
But I think that's the strength of Europe, the regulatory superpower that helps the world think of how to move forward. I mean, they also say in America, Europe moves safer, Asia moves faster. But faster doesn't mean always beneficial. Sometimes you move so fast on critical minerals, you move so fast on AI safety and things like that, and there could be the negative sides that are coming from it. And you come back to Europe and you see how you think about the governance of big tech companies over here, how you think about the environmental issues and things like that. So.
Great.
That's where the strength is in Europe.
So we could talk the whole evening. I have unlimited amount of questions in my head. Exactly.